Our second scripture lesson this morning comes from the Gospel of Matthew in the 16th chapter, verses 21 through 28. From that time on, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and undergo great suffering at the hands of the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed, and on the third day be raised. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, "God forbid it, Lord. This must never happen to you." But he turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a hindrance to me, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." Then Jesus told his disciples, "If any wish to come after me, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit them if they gain the whole world but forfeit their life? Or what will they give in return for their life? For the Son of Man is to come with his angels in the glory of his Father, and then he will repay everyone for what has been done. Truly, I tell you, there are some standing here who will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So naturally, Labor Day weekend has me thinking about work. But not just a job, but how we might attach vocational meaning to anything and everything that we are doing. We are a people of work, maybe especially so in this country. We might place a little too much emphasis on our occupational identities. But as a whole, our work, what we do, does potentially encourage us in developing purpose. But also, maybe not at all. Maybe our work is not something we are passionate about. Maybe our work is not something we feel particularly called to. Maybe work is even a strain on our very being. We can leave room for having a job and having separate vocational callings. What's important is that we find our passions, we utilize our gifts to bless the people around us. That's the faithful work that we'll be talking about this morning. The universal call of the human work of love. That we are not idle, but proactive towards relationships, justice, healing, things of that nature. All in all, it's good for us to seek every opportunity to bring about God's kingdom in the ways that we work. The Romans passage we read earlier really does read like a Christian job description. And if we do our job well, others will see Christ in us. Pastor John Debevoise has referred to the Romans passage as refrigerator magnet scripture, something that is so foundational and memorable that we should slap it on the fridge. We will have that reminder as we walk by it. Because there's a lot. There's a lot to keep track of. What we are supposed to be doing, how we're supposed to be doing it, which is why we need a place that we walk by often, like a refrigerator, to remind us. Also, and this is truly important, faith work is not a managerial position. I don't see anything that should make us think that we are the bosses. In fact, I see more explicitly directives that reveal that God is the boss and the only boss. Which really brings us to our gospel text. Y'all remember Peter? We've been talking about Peter quite a bit these last few weeks. He's the guy who was quick to get out of the boat. Do you remember that? He's the guy that Jesus says, "You are the rock that I'm going to build my church on." He's the guy that Jesus tosses the keys to the kingdom of heaven to. It's that Peter who in this moment is a guy receiving a big rebuke when he tries to be the boss. Jesus is not confused about his own job description. He knows what he must do. He knows the sacrifices he must make, the faith that he must demonstrate. And Peter has the gall to try to reprimand Jesus. He pulls him aside. Y'all, this is like awkward. He pulls Jesus aside and is like, hey, JC, cool it. Don't be saying all those things. You're bumming everybody out. That's not going to happen. And Jesus isn't having it. And says, and while it doesn't say in Scripture, I am certain he says it loud enough for all of the disciples to hear, "Get behind me, Satan." That's pretty cold. I think it'll make Peter think twice before he tries to be the boss again. And if we're the disciples, we might be in the background like, but pump those brakes, friends. How many times have we told God how it must be? Our prayers trying to pull God down our path of desire. Those times when we jump into the judge's seat, forgetting that judgment is God's and God's alone. We too have to fight the temptation to be the boss when it comes to faith. Jesus is clear about that. It must be someone to take a humble posture who will be worthy of following him. He himself demonstrates this. He says, if anyone wish to come after me, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. We can add that to our Christian job description. Have y'all ever heard or seen the show Undercover Boss? This is a reality TV show about 10 years ago, and the premise is that upper management, like a CEO, would spend a week doing entry-level work within their own companies. And a couple things would typically happen. The co-workers, the other entry-level employees, would speak about their displeasure of the company, which is always pretty funny. And then the CEO would have greater appreciation for those doing the work lower on the totem pole. And then there would be this like big reveal, like, oh, gosh, like that's actually the boss. Like, whoa, crazy. And then the boss would go back to like the tallest floor of the building, and they would never see each other again. It wasn't a great show. And at the end of the day, we can't deny the disparities from the folks that work at the top and those who work at the bottom. And then we have Jesus, who isn't going undercover to do the work of the lowly. Jesus is always prepared to do the inglorious work he is called to do. Jesus models this every day of his vocational career, the ministry that he does in this world. He heals the sick. He leaves room for children. He washes feet. He dines with sinners. And he even picks up a cross. Almost everything he does would be considered beneath him by societal standards. And we are called into all of it. It's nice. It's helpful that Paul gives us this refrigerator magnet scripture in Romans. It's good to focus on becoming more loving and patient and kind and forgiving. But we also can't forget the literal, low work of being Jesus' disciples. Servant leadership, that's Jesus' posture, serving others first. Find the most unpleasant, least glorious job and do that. In your work, in your workplaces, in your neighborhoods, and in your homes. I was on a service trip to the Bahamas a few years back with our high schoolers, and it was like hot, okay? so hot. Our first night was the hottest and worst sleep of my entire life. It hadn't rained for a few days, and the compound that we were staying at hadn't had its windows open for those few days. And this is the first night as we get there, and it's bunk beds, and it's teenagers, and there's no AC. It was rough. Y'all, my lips were stinging from the heat. I've never experienced that. I was like, why do my lips hurt? Fire! Like, it was just the strangest thing. It was that hot that week in the Bahamas. And after a brutal day of a painting project out in the baking sun, I remember looking out and seeing my reflection and students who were drinking water, trying to cool off the best they could in the shade, except for one person. I'm not going to name that person because his humble self wouldn't want me to. And that person, I remember, as we were in the shade, he was just cleaning off the paintbrushes in the heat in this murky water bucket for like 30 extra minutes. By far the worst job of the day. No one asked him to do it. He did it because it was a job that needed to be done. We need more of that, friends. More people willing to jump into those humble spots. Of course, we want our job descriptions to reflect work that we find meaningful, work that is maybe simple enough and is fulfilling, and maybe that's our reality. And we're lucky, we're blessed that we get to work jobs that really, truly fulfill us. Regardless, Jesus has called us towards a different way, a way of humility. So we don't turn a blind eye when we walk by a piece of trash. We are quick to take the task that nobody wants. We're quick to volunteer our time even though we are tired and busy. We are quick to help vulnerable populations in our community and the world, even if it's costly, even if it's inconvenient. We are good friends and we're good listeners, even when we don't want to be. I wonder if we were a little more intentional with our faith job descriptions, how many would-be prayers we would be answering just by our thoughtful, compassionate living. I imagine a lot. There's much to do, and faith work doesn't get a weekend. It doesn't get a vacation. Thank God, literally, thank God that we do not do this work alone. And we do get lunch breaks. We sit at this table with the one who will inspire us in this work, Jesus, who joins us here even now.